Okay, ich habe nachher mal das eine Klach, nur eine Klach, nur eine Klach. Das Simcha kommt auf Leib. Okay, now, tomorrow I think is a B'sha Hanapala's yard site, which is a wonderful tzaddik. The first yard site, Father Volshansky. Unser Elements are lang gegangen. So we're learning Tanya. It's been a long time since we learned Tanya. As if Allah has stated, so many excuses between the snow and my foot and my travels. The bottom line is we missed a lot of Sundays. So here we go. We're here. Now I gave out a page of Chumash. I made 15 copies. The violet is enough. I'm imagining that I won't have it. I'm hoping that I won't have enough. But at the moment, there's enough copies. But if you have a Tanya, open up to this page right here. This is called the Sha'ar Blattel. The Sha'ar Blattel of Tanya. The Sha'ar Blatt of Tanya. It looks like this. This page. The Sha'ar Blatt of Tanya is a combination of the Alter Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe. And I'm going to tell you the Friedrich Rebbe is part Fried because it's the Kitzur. When the Friedrich Rebbe came to America, the Friedrich Rebbe did a lot of things in establishing orders in Chabad that never existed before. And Mistamed is Sibis Pnimiyes, but there's also Sibis Chitzenius. There was an opportunity to print Chassidus on a big fanem. There was also a need, an unbelievable need in America. You know, as much as you give, it's not enough to give Chassidus. So almost as soon as the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe arrived, he began to organize Lubavitch in a very, very systematic way, and also very legal. Everything was done legal. And he made 3 or 4 organizations. Each one of them was registered officially in the government as a separate organization. There was, of course, the Merkaz Le'Nyonei Chinuch, which was the outreach arm of Lubavitch. There was the Machane Yisrael, which is supposed to be the in-reach arm of Lubavitch. That means for Frum people. And then there's Heitzah Svarim Kahos. This is the publishing house of Kahos, Karnei Hei Teira, which is an abbreviation, Kahos is an abbreviation for Karnei Hei Teira, the rays, the beams of light of the Teira. The 4th organization, which already existed before the Rebbe came, was Agudas Chasidei Chabad. And by and large, Agudas Chasidei Chabad became the Rebbe himself. And there's a lot to say about Agudas Chasidei Chabad. I mean, for many, many years, Agudas Chasidei Chabad was the Chaver Kadisha, and the Beis HaChaim, the cemeteries were under Aguch. 770 belonged to Aguch. Today, Aguch is much more important because of the Halamas Vestated. But the organizations that the Rebbe worked with were 3. The 3 organizations which dealt with the living were 3 organizations: Merkez, and Machane, and Kahos. Kahos was an organization which the Rebbe gave the Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe gave the Rebbe, our Rebbe's organization, and its purpose was to print the Chassidus of the Chabad Rabbeim. And of course, the Rebbe undertook this. The way the Rebbe's worked, worked was as follows. He was in charge. The Rebbe wrote a letter to Gringas. Last week I was in Montreal, and one of the reasons I went was because Rabbi Gringas had a yard site, and his Eidim makes every year an event. So I repeated to them something which I've said here many times. I actually brought the letter into you. When the Rebbe lost his father, Rabbi Gringlas, who was a bocher, wrote the Rebbe a letter of Nicham Avelim, a consolation letter. And in response to the letter which Rabbi Gringlas wrote the Rebbe wrote him back a letter, such a beautiful letter. It was a bocher. And in the letter, the Rebbe talks about the Tchias HaMesim. Because Misa has to do with when you think of death, what do you think of? Tchias HaMesim. Like the Rebbe said, the Maimer, the Shabbos, when the Rebbe passed away, Mishpatim. It was a Maimer of Zayich, it was a Maimer of Machta Shekel, Shabbos Shkolim. The whole Maimer was about Tchias HaMesim. What is the Indian? From Misa, Tchias HaMesim. So the Rebbe wrote him a letter about Tchias HaMesim. And in the letter, the Rebbe writes to him, there's 4 levels of death. And it corresponds to the 4 levels of Shem Havayim. And accordingly, there's 4 levels of resurrection, Tchias HaMesim, including the biological, the simple physical Tchias HaMesim. There's also Ruchnis Tchias HaMesim. And the Rebbe writes, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe the Shver, gave me, the Rebbe says, 4 jobs. And they correspond to the idea of Tchias HaMeisim on all four levels. And the Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Rebbe the task of being Mechayim Meisim, that's the spirit, the neshama of that letter, on four levels. And the four organizations that he lists is Kahos, and Machaneh, and Merkez, and Chevra Kadisha. The Rebbe was involved in the Chevra Kadisha. The Frierdiker Rebbe put the Rebbe in charge of the Chevra Kadisha. I believe this is one of the jobs that the Rebbe and the Rashag shared. The Rashag was given the yeshiva. The Rebbe was given all the new meisters. That means Merkez and Machaneh and Kahos. But I believe that in Chevra Kadisha they both were given positions by the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Chevra Kadisha of Agudas Chasidi Chabad. So these are four organizations. That's why I'm mentioning it as four. But one of the organizations that they started to say was Kahos, Kanehei Teira, whose role it was to publish Chassidus of the Rabbi. Now the way it worked was like this. For Merkez for sure, and could be for Machaneh, the Frierdiker Rebbe paid the bills. The Frierdiker Rebbe fundraised. And the money the Frierdiker Rebbe raised was given to the Rebbe to manage Merkez and Yonah Chinuch, and could also be Machaneh. The Rashag had to raise money for the yeshiva himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe helped him a lot, I'm sure, but the Rashag had to raise the money for himself. The money of Merkez and Machaneh Sol, I'm not sure about the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Rebbe. But the money for Kahos, the Rebbe had to raise himself. The money for the Chassidus, the Rebbe had to raise the money. So oftentimes the Rebbe's constraint, the Rebbe's limitation, the Rebbe's symptom was he didn't have money. It's a very big conflict of interest. When you're doing different things, different organizations, they're all vitally important, and the money is coming from different places. And you have to keep the money separate. It's very difficult to do. But that's how it was. The Rebbe was in charge of raising the funds for Kahos. It's very implicit, maybe even explicit in the letters. Merkez for sure, the Frierdiker paid the bills. Actually, a Sikha the Rebbe said after the Estalkus, that for Merkez the Rebbe paid the bills. And Machaneh Yisrael, I don't know what kind of expenses they had. Machaneh Yisrael Faket was an organization that really brought in money, but Machaneh Yisrael, I think also Frierdiker Rebbe was involved with directly. So the Rebbe got here, he began to organize Chassidus, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he made this page, on the very top it says, this is all the Frierdiker Rebbe signs, Sifria Eitzer Chasidim Lubavitch. The library of the treasure of Chasidim of Lubavitch. And underneath you have the right and the left and the center. The center says Kevet Shalsheles Ha'ed. That means the pamphlet of the chain of light, which goes under Rabbeim. So the Rebbe said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, it shouldn't say Kevet Shalsheles Ha'ed, it should say Kevet Shalsheles HaMoed. Because it's the Teir of the Rabbeim, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Magid, and the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Shab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe, the Kevet Shalsheles HaMoed. So the Frierdiker Rebbe answered the Rebbe, Minei Obey, in Moed is Mitokin Ishtalshalos. If you're seeing the Rebbe as a source, it's one Rebbe, it's one source. The only level where you could see the Rabbeim as separate is the level of Oyed, the Oyed of the Rebbe. The level of Moed, it's one. And then on the right side it says Heichel Shlishi. Every Rebbe is a different palace. The Baal Shem Tov is Heichel Rishon, the Mizdish Magid is Heichel Sheni, the Alter Rebbe is Heichel Shlishi, the Rebbe, our Rebbe is Heichel Tshini. So every Rebbe is a palace, Heichel. On the left it says Sha'ar. In other words, the palace has many gates. So the Sefer Tanya Kaddish is called Sha'ar Rishon. The Tanya is Sha'ar Rishon. Of course, the Alter Rebbe has other svarim. You have the Siddur, you have the Shulchan Aruch, you have the Maimorim, you have all kinds of other Inyanim from Alter Rebbe. Every Sefer, or in some cases, every group of svarim is a different Sha'ar. In other words, Alter Tanya is Sha'ar Rishon. But Mestami the Shulchan Aruch, I didn't look, but Mestami the Shulchan Aruch is Sha'ar Sheni. That's how it was arranged. That every Rebbe has a Heichel, has a palace, and the palace consists of many Sha'ar. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's own design. And of course, on the bottom of the page, the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe had a logo designed. I don't know who designed the logo, but the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, was personally involved in the design of the logo. It saw a Svarim. And in the center you have an abbreviation, Kahos Kuf Hei Tov, and on top it says Tane Hei Teira, and underneath it says Lubavitch. And then the entire bottom of the page, everything you see on the bottom of the page is part of the design of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The top of the page and the bottom of the page of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's one more thing that you don't see on this page, and that is this: the border. The Rebbe has a separate border for each Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov has his own border, the Mezritcher Maggid has his own border, the Alter Rebbe has his own border, the Mittler Rebbe has his own border, the Tzemach Tzedek has his own border, and when the Rebbe printed his father's Shavim, he printed them with the Tzemach Tzedek's border because he's an Enkel from Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe Marash has his own border, the Rebbe Rashab has his own border, the Frierdiker has his own border. Each Rebbe has a different border. And the borders were chosen, if I'm not wrong, based on precedent. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't go find new borders. He went back to earlier prints of Sfarim of each of the Rabbeim that had been printed before and chose a border, and this became standard. Every time they print a Maimah from Alten Rebbe, the border will look like this, like these half circles. It's standard. But each Rebbe is a different border. You pay attention, each Rebbe is a different border. There's a very geschmack of Maise, but Derech Agav, that when the Rebbe made the Hayom Yom, which was the first chibur the Rebbe made, so he said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's printing a sefer of his own under Kahas. So what border should he use? So the Frierdiker Rebbe said to the Rebbe, der Tate doch gewen apnimi, und du bist doch apnimi, nade dem Taten Sha'ar. The Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Rebbe the best compliment and the best gift that you could possibly. My father was a pnimi, which I'm not going to translate at the moment. You are doch a pnimi. I'm giving you my father. So you'll see the Rebbe's Sfarim and the Rebbe Rashab's Sfarim had the same border, the same exact border. All the other Rabbeim, each border was different. So going back to the Sha'ar Blattel, going back to this page, the top of the page and the Frierdiker page is a standard design, which the Frierdiker made for all the Rabbeim. Then of course, near the bottom, you have the name of each one of the Rabbeim, and the nusach that's used by all the Rabbeim has also tradition. Where the nuschos come from? By the Mittler Rebbe's Sfarim, the nusach that's used is the nusach that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote. By the Alter Rebbe's Sfarim, it's a nusach which Mustama the Mittler Rebbe wrote. The nusach of how each Rebbe is described. You see these words. I believe this nusach is used in each of the Alter Rebbe's Sfarim, based on the nusach which the Mittler Rebbe probably wrote when he printed the Tanya after Alter Rebbe's Histalkas. But from the word Sefer until the word Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, the Alter Rebbe wrote himself. And everything I just said was a long way of getting to this point. I talked to you about the top of the page and the bottom of the page. These words, Sefer L'Kuti Amorim, until Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, the Alter Rebbe wrote himself. So let's first read it inside. And again, you need the ikid the page. The Chumash is more important than the Tanya. And I'm reading it, I'm translating. Sefer L'Kutei Amorim. This is called the book of Sefer, of L'Kutei, a collection of sayings. And you should know that Sefer L'Kutei Amorim is a shem kloli, is a general name. But the Sefer L'Kutei Amorim has different chalakim. We're beginning Chelek Rishon, the first Chelek, Hanikra B'Shem, which is called Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of intermediates. Rabbi Chaim Miller uses the words in-betweener, and it's a very, very good word. It's not a word. I don't think it's a word, but it makes the point in betweener. Yeah? And of course, just like you have Sefer Shal Beinanim, you have Chelek Rishon, L'Kutei Amorim, Chelek Rishon, which is called Sefer Shal Beinanim. You have L'Kutei Amorim, Chelek Sheni, Hanikra B'Shem, Sha'ar, Hayichad Ve'emunah. And you have L'Kutei Amorim, Chelek Shlish, Hanikra B'Shem, Yigeres HaTshuva. Now, the L'Kutei Amorim is a title klali, a collection of sayings. The L'Kutei Amorim, the Alter Rebbe made two chalakim originally, and then he made a third chelek. The first chelek was called Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of intermediates. The second chelek is called Sha'ar Hayichad Ve'emunah, the book of faith and unity. And then later, the third chelek is the L'Kutei Amorim, Chelek Shlisha, Nikra B'Shem, Yigeres HaTshuva, the treatise on Tshuva. The last two chalakim, I don't know if you could call them L'Kutei Amorim, because the Alter Rebbe, this is Alter Rebbe's letters. And they're simply called with the names Yigeres HaKedesh and Kuntres Achrin, which I talked about earlier. The Alter Rebbe's children made it their business, after the Alter Rebbe passed, to gather any original manuscripts of Chassidus which the Alter Rebbe wrote. Because the Alter Rebbe actually wrote very little Chassidus. It's hard to understand, but this is the way it was. Alter Rebbe did not write a lot of Chassidus. He said a lot of Chassidus, but he wrote very little. And their idea was to gather all the Chassidus the Alter Rebbe wrote himself and publish it in what they considered a complete Tanya. And they also added notes. When Alter Rebbe was preparing the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe wrote notes for himself. Pilpulim in Kabbalah, because a lot of the things Alter Rebbe said contradicts Arizal, or there's a contradiction between one Arizal and another Arizal, or Arizal and Azayah. And Alter Rebbe for himself wrote notes. These long notes are really, some of them are found by Kitzur in the Hagos in the Tanya, in Perek Mem and other places. So they took these notes and published them in what's called Kunter Sachan, an afterthought. There are other original Maimorim that the Alter Rebbe wrote himself in Chassidus outside the Tanya, but very, very few. Some of them are printed in Teira Eid. But this was their endeavor to gather whatever original Chassidus they could get. But the Alter Rebbe wrote himself and published it along with a complete Tanya. In other words, there was all the Chassidus that the Rebbe wrote, but Ksav Yod that he wrote himself should be included in the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. But L'Kuti Amorim, L'Cheda goes to the first three halakim. L'Kuti Amorim, Cheda Krishna is called Sefer Shal Beinanim. L'Kuti Amorim, Cheda Sheni is called Sha'ar, Yichud V'Emunah. And L'Kuti Amorim, Cheda Shlishi is called the Geras HaTshuva. Hanika B'Shem Sefer Shal Beinim. Melukot, there is a compilation, B'Pi Svarim or B'Pi Seferim. From Svarim, from books and scribes. And the Mashpiyim, when they teach it, Svarim, they say, goes on the Arizal and the Shalah. Sometimes they say it also goes on the Maral. And Seferim means the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritcher Magid, and then the few other influences that the Alter Rebbe had. They all passed away by this point, except for Ram Kalasker. Based on the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Ki karev elecha adava ma'ed. It is near to you, the matter very much. Beficha in your mouth, ubavavcha in your heart. La seisei to do. Levayed hated to explain well. Eichu karev ma'ed, how it's very near. But that charuchu psad in a long way, in a short way, or as we like to call it, the long short way. Be'ed that Hashem yizbarach, with the help of the Eibush, the blessed be He. These words are the lashon of the Gaon HaMachav. This is the Alter Rebbe's own words. This is the introduction to the Tanya. So the Rebbe said once in a sikha, which I remember, that people think that it's an odd phenomenon to make a whole sefer that explains one pasuk in Torah. So the Rebbe says there is such a sefer, which is a sefer which explains one pasuk in Torah, Sefer Tanya Kaddish. The whole Tanya explains one pasuk. And then the Rebbe mentioned it's not the only sefer like that. There's another sefer like that. And the Rebbe mentioned the sefer which is called Tikkun Zeyar. Tikkun Zeyar is from Shem Bayachoy. In the entire sefer Tikkun Zeyar explains the pasuk Bereshis Bara Lekim Eis HaShamayim Ve'eis HaAretz. The whole Tikkun Zeyar explains one pasuk Bereshis. And there's other such fun. There's a sefer from the Megala Amulkis, the Nosson Shapiro, that explains the first pasuk in Baruch Chana. Several hundred different ways. It's an amazing thing. He would explain a pasuk, Reish Yud Beis, 212 different explanations for one pasuk. This was his style. The Megala Amukis said it was very, very. He saw the infinity of Torah in a way which actually makes you very nervous when you see how much he saw in a few words. But anyway, there's other psukim which explain a pasuk. The whole Tanya is explaining one pasuk. So let me start with the first point. And the first point is the following. The original Tanya is two sections. L'Kuti Amorim Sefer Shal Beinanim and L'Kuti Amorim Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah. The Geras HaTshuva, which may have already been written, was not added to the Tanya for the first 9 years, which probably means 5 or 6 printings of the Tanya. In Tovkuf Samach Vav, the Alter Rebbe allowed them to print the Geras HaTshuva, but they printed them under a Kama. And the subsequent editions, which is about 10 years after the original printing of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe let them add the Madura Basa, the final draft of the Geras HaTshuva, and that's how we have it now in the Tanya. After the Alter Rebbe passed away, which was 17 years after the first publishing of the Tanya, his children, the Mittel Rebbe and the Mordechai and the Meisha, published the complete Tanya, which is 5 sections, and that's how it's been Ad Hayom Hazeh. Every Tanya has 5 sections. In the year Tafresh Samach, 1900, the Rebbe Rashab was Mesa Nefesh to reprint a new Tanya. He himself worked very hard on it. There was a chassid by the name of Rabbi Grossman Nikolaev, Rosh Nikolaev, the Sheikh of Nikolaev, was very, very involved in preparing the Tanya for print, and they made all kinds of corrections and even additions. And they printed what's called the Vilna Tanya. The Vilna Tanya is our print. Every single Tanya, with the exception of 1 or 2, since 1900, looks exactly the same. It's the same oises, it's the same layout. This is the Vilna print. Originally, the owners of this print was the Hamon of Achim Ram. The Vilna printing house owned the rights to the Tanya. And then about 8 or 9 years later, there was a Yid by the name of Aronovich. His name is mentioned on page Beis. Anshel Aronovich, who was the Rebbe's Bokeach to buy the rights to the Tanya from the Almonova Achim Ram, the Vilna printing house. And since that time, the Tanya has belonged to the Rebbe Rashab, to the Frierdiker, and the Rebbe. The Tanya always belonged to the Rabbeim. We own the rights to the Vilna printing of the Tanya. You want to print a Slavita print, nobody can stop you. But the Vilna Tanya belongs to us. The Rabbeim bought it and they've kept it and guarded it and printed not thousands of copies, thousands of prints. they're close to 10,000 different prints of Tanya. There's one of the Rebbe's in Yonim. They printed Tanya b'chol mokam u'mokam. Cholasar v'asar. So, but the original Tanya was only 2 sections. These 2 sections, which are called Beinanim and Sha'ar v'Emunah, represent the 2 poles of Chassidus. Chassidus has 2 poles. And I've talked to you about these poles many times. Many times. And I'll start from the beginning, okay? Which is a fancy way of saying I'm going to waste a little time. This is a Sikha for Friedrich and Rebbe. I'm not creating this, I'm simply repeating it. When the Baal Shem Tov was a boy, we don't know how old he was, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. His father was nostalgic, his father passed. And before his father passed, his father called him. And his father gave Matzavor, a will. Now the Baal Shem Tov at the age of 5, I learned Tanakh, I learned Shmuel. I have a Seder on the internet, I get every day a few psukim of Shmuel. Shmuel was 3 years old, his mother deposited him in the Beis HaMikdash and left him there. Left him. This child lived 52 years, he spent 50 years in the service of his people, which started when he was 2. Now I talk about child abuse, huh? Shmuel was not a normal child. Shmuel, at the age of 2, he's laying in the Beis HaMikdash, and he hears someone calling him Shmuel. So he goes to Eli and says, "Did you call me?" He says, "No. Somebody called my name." He said, "Go back to sleep." He hears Shmuel. So he goes back to Eli and said, "Did you call me?" "No." Till Eli figured that it's Pasha Nevuah. So he says to this little boy, "Next time somebody says your name, say, 'Yeah, I'm listening.'" Shmuel became a Navi as a little boy, a Yidel. Shmuel. The Gemara says Shmuel was Shachar Meshach Aaron, was equal to Meshach Aaron together. So there are children that are exceptions to the rules, you understand? When the Baal Shem Tov was 2, 3, 4, 5, he was not 2, 3, 4, 5. He was giant, and more giant. Nevertheless, when his father spoke to him on his deathbed, he spoke to him very, very simple. And he said to him these words. You've all heard these words so many times. He spoke to him in Yiddish, of course. He said, "Yisraelik, du sollst nicht mehr haben von kein Sach, nur von den Eibischen allein, und du sollst lieb haben jeden mit der ganze Tiefenisch von deiner Neshama." That's the whole will. Yisraelik, you should fear nothing except for the Eibishter himself, and you should love every Jew with all the depths of your soul. This is the tzavah, this is the will which the Baal Shem Tov's father gave the Baal Shem Tov. Says the Frierdiker Rebbe that in these 2 statements you have the whole Chassidus. The whole Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov's father consolidated the whole Indian Chassidus into 2 lines which he shared with the Baal Shem Tov as a boy. Again, the emphasis is not on boy, the emphasis is on Baal Shem Tov, but nevertheless the Baal Shem Tov was Yannick, was young. How does it work? Because Chassidus has 2 poles. It has a philosophical and a mystical pole, and it has a practical pole, a heart pole. In other words, there's the intellect, there's the study of Chassidus, and there is the life of Chassidim. The study of Chassidus, if you cut to the chase, comes down to one idea. Ein Eid Milvado. Right? Hu Levadi Hu Ve'ein Zulasi. This is Chassidus. Chassidus is Achtas Havaya, that the Eibishter is one. And of course, for those of us who've learned a little Chassidus, it doesn't mean that the Eibishter is one as opposed to Chas V'Shalom 2. It means the Eibishter is one and there is nothing besides for him, including us. Not Hashem is one and we're 2 or 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 billion. We're part of his oneness. Yachid and Echad and so on. We're part of the Eibush. That's what Achtas means. And the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidus Chabad reveals and teaches and inspires a sense of Achtas Hashem that's more profound than anything that was understood until Chassidus. And of course it expresses itself in the Baal Shem Tov Shita, in Hashgacha Pratis. Everything is very, very precise. And there's Havas B'chol Rega, that Hashem creates the world every single instant, which is the basis for the intimate and the imminent involvement of the Eibishter in the world, and Yediyah, and Nevuah, and Alagut Azach. So the first core teaching of Chassidus is Achtas Havaya, Ein Milvada. The Eibishter and the world are one. Not only is it's a Keil Ha'elam, the world dependent upon the Eibishter, but Keil Elam, the world and the Eibishter are one and the same. This is the first principle. And this is represented by the first half of what the Baal Shem Tov told his son. Fear nothing except for God himself. And we know stories that are printed in the Shulchan Baal Shem Tov and in other places which are reliable. Emes HaMaisis. Nit no Sheina Maisis, nor Emes HaMaisis. That the Baal Shem Tov in his life, when he would encounter great danger, he would start up with klippos that were very powerful. He used to say, you could see it in Shivcha in Hebrew. He would say the words, but I fear nothing except for God. This is what his father told him on his deathbed, and he took it literally and simply. His father said to him, don't be afraid. He said, I'm not afraid. And he went through life with this, I'm not afraid. With this, I'm not afraid. The Baal Shem Tov went through the whole life. I think I told you this Maaseh when we started, the introduction to the Tanya. I told you the Maaseh that Baal Shem Tov brought down the Samach Mem, the source of evil, into this world. And the Samach Mem said to the Baal Shem Tov, I've been on earth only twice. How come you're not afraid to bring me down to the world? So the Baal Shem Tov said, I fear nothing except for God himself. Why? This is what my father told me before his histalka, before his neshama. So that represents the philosophical, mystical half of Chassidus, what we call the Haskol, the scholarly half, the intellectual half, which is the inyan of Achdas Hashem. And then the other pole is the Hart. What's the Hart? A Yiddish neshama. Because Chassidus really made a revolution. And the revolution that Chassidus made, and it's truly a revolution, is that Chassidus made the most important thing in Judaism, the Jew. You're not Jewish because you do Torah and mitzvahs. You do Torah and mitzvahs because you're Jewish. And if you don't do Torah and mitzvahs, you're still a Jew. And there's nothing you can do to de-Jew or undo Jew or dis-Jew yourself. This is a revolution. It's a very, very big revolution. It's a fundamental, it's an axiomatic, it's an atzmiistic change in how Yidden see the Yebishter and the Har Sinai and the Torah and the Shmafeh and themselves. The Baal Shem Tov revealed that a Yid is more the purpose of the Eibishter than the Torah which the Eibishter gave him. It's an incredible revolution. Incredible revolution. It's an important revolution. And it's the basis and the foundation for how we Chassidim try to live based on the Iran, the Adrach we have from the Rebbe and from the Rabbi. And in practical terms, this is the union of Yahavta Alecha Kamecha, Avas Yisrael. Avas Yisrael, the way Chassidus explains it, has to do with the neshama. Nafsham ikir, gufam tafel. When you focus on the neshama of Echad L'Kolan, all Jewish people are one. Like Avraham Friedman sings in that song, "Look inside the heart of a Jew." It's a very old song. Forever one of his first albums. It's Tanya Pedek Lev, Pashat, written in rhyme. He sings it. Forever one. You look inside the heart of it, you open up its many doors, and the soul that you'll find there inside is a reflection of yours. I'm chazaning Balpeh, which tells you how old the song is. Because if it's less than 30 years old, I wouldn't remember. Yeah, and he Pashat, the whole niggin is Tanya Pedek Lev. It's written out in a niggin, and he sings it. It's Tanya Pedek Lev. This is the second pole of Chassidus, and this is the second part of what the Baal Shem Tov's father told him on his deathbed. You should love every Jew with all depths of your soul. So the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, says in this Sikha that all of Chassidus was summarized in two mishpatim, in two thoughts, which the Baal Shem Tov's father told the Baal Shem Tov, let us dvoy, before the neshama left this world. So when the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, he wrote two svarim, two chalakim. Each chelik of the Tanya represents another part of this tzavah. One part of the Tanya speaks about the Yiddish neshama, and ultimately the heart of that is v'hafta l'recha kamoicha pedek lev. And the other part of that speaks about Achdas Hashem, the oneness of the Eibush. So now let's think about this. What was the order the Baal Shem Tov used when he spoke to the Baal Shem Tov? Which came first? First came the philosophy, and then came the heart. First came Achtos Hashem, and then came V'Aftarecha Kameichem. When the Alter Rebbe sat down to wrote the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe had a quandary, had a dilemma. And this says Nesiches. Ich beshaf go nicht, ich chaze. I'm not creating anything, I'm simply repeating. Because on the one hand, everybody understands that the credibility of a movement has to do with its core ideas. And the core ideas of Chassidus are the scholarly ideas, are the mystical ideas, are the philosophical ideas, are the Haskalah. But on the other hand, the purpose of the movement is not that they should remain theoretically, they should be brought like Hamed Reshikir, Ela HaMaiseh, you should do it practically. So what do you put first? When the Baal Shem Tov's father spoke to the Baal Shem Tov, a tzaddik speaking to a tzaddik, it's no problem. It's not a big problem. But the Alter Rebbe wrote a sefer for all of us, and for all generations. And the Alter Rebbe didn't know what you should put first. So the end of the story is that the Alter Rebbe decided to put backwards, not like the Baal Shem Tov's father. First came hearts, first came neshama, kuti amarim sefer shel beinanim, and danach is yikum in kop, and afterwards came the mind, came the soul, the shara yichud ve'emunah. But the Alter Rebbe wanted us to know. This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe explains. The Alter Rebbe wanted us to know that even after he made the decision, he was still unsure. So he left hints. What are the hints? That I think three times. In the introduction to the Sha'ar Yichud V'Amunah, the second section of Tanya has an introduction. And the introduction is called Chinuch Katan. That's what it's called, Chinuch Katan. So this introduction to Sha'ar Yichud V'Amunah Chelik Sheni, which is called Chinuch Katan, three times Alter Rebbe writes U'Kamesha Yizbayir, as I'm going to explain later. And Kamesha Yizbayir refers to things written in the Kusi Amorim Sefer Shel Beinanim, which are printed in the first Chelik. Perek Mem Hey, Perek Mem, different productive, Perek Mem Daled, and Perek Mem Vav. The Alter Rebbe references the Likutei Amarim Sefer Shel Beinanim, which is printed first, and writes, as I'm going to explain later. It says the Frierdiker Rebbe, because this was the way the Alter Rebbe indicated that even though the decision that he made was to put the Neshama of a Yid before Klayochel Elikus, for the Eibishter's Achdus. In other words, he started with the practical side, the hard side, and went from there to the mind side and the mystical side. He left hints to the fact that this was a decision that he made hesitantly. A decision that he made, if I may use this word, with a certain measure of heaviness. It's not given as a green. Okay? So, this is Chelik Rishon. Hanika B'Shem Sefer Shel Beinanim, as the Alter Rebbe decided to arrange the Tanya, where he puts first Neshama, first a Yiddish Avodah, and again, the heart of it is V'Haftarecha Kamoicha, and second, he's going to have the Sha'ar Yichud, which speak about the Eibishter, Achtos Hashem, and so on and so forth. This is all the Alter Rebbe decided to. Chacha Filu, like I said, that the Baal Shem Tov's father told him a different Seder. The Alter Rebbe, when it came Lamata, reversed it, and he put the Neshama before the Haskalah, before the Achtos Hashem. Okay? Now, of course, the second thing is that it's miyusad on the postek karev elach adav me'ed b'fiach b'vav chalas. They say levayer heitev eichu karev me'ed b'derech haruch uktzara b'ezer Hashem yisbar. So I'm going to skip. Okay, I made plans, and of course, as can always be expected, whatever I plan to do, I'm not going to do, and whatever I didn't plan to do, I'm going to end up doing. B'derech haruch uktzara is a lashon gemara. The story that we always heard from Mashpiyim, it's a story in the Gemara, in the Masech. It's the same story that we heard from Malamdim. The Gemara tells a story. One of the Tanoim said that there was no one ever won me in an argument, except for a woman and a boy and a girl. A woman and a boy and a girl. He tells three different stories. He tells three stories how people outsmarted him. He tells three different stories. And each story, it's a guy that they have to study. And one of the stories, maybe from the little boy, is that he came to a crossroads. And he asked the little boy, which way leads to the town? He said, both. So which way should I go? So the boy told him, this is long and short, and this is short and long. Exactly what you learned in your Mashpim, Tzagamorim and Fereshes. This road is long and short, and this is short and long. Long and short, first is long. Long sounds long, yeah. Short and long, the first word is short. It's in Gemara from Drei Shittis. Als ein Mensch sagt Loshen Rishon, Loshen Achren, sie tfeis Loshen Rishon, sie tfeis Loshen Achren, sie darf abgaben beide Sachen. Es hat Rabbi Yehuda mit der Rabbi Shimon, mit der Rabbi Yossi. When someone says two expressions, I'm giving this to you now and in 30 days. So what is it, now or in 30 days? Which one? You count the first Loshen, or second Loshen, or both Loshen. Don't worry, Torah is very complicated. You're wondering why women don't learn Gemara. Maybe you see now it's torture. It's torture. I'm not saying you shouldn't learn Chatasham. Learn Gesundheit, but it's not meant to be easy. Teda Shabbat Peh was not meant to be easy. Hasken Atzmach Alum Teda Sheini Yerushalayim. But okay. So he went down the short path, and he sees Taka, the city is right there, but it's full of thorns and a swamp. So he went back. And he goes the other road. The other road's Taka long, but it was a very, very comfortable road. You just walked into the town. So this becomes a symbolism. Ktsarav Arucha is short. It's very quick, but it's filled with peril. It's complicated. Arucho, Ktsara, is the long road. It takes a long time. But it's Ktsara. It's guaranteed. It's secure. Or to say it in other words, when you make progress, you hold on to your progress. It's not like today you make progress and tomorrow you start from the beginning again. When you make progress, you actually move from a level to a level, and you grow and you change and you advance and so forth and so on. Okay? So this is what the Gemara says. So Alter Rebbe wrote a Tanya b'derech harucho ktsara. So there's two insights into these words, harucho ktsara. The first insight is that the Alter Rebbe is writing a Sefer of Chassidus. And Chassidus, as we know, is about the Eibishter, about Arukus. With the two poles that I established before. The first is Achtas Havaya, and the second is V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha, is Avas Yisrael. This is about Shem Tov's gift to the world. Teiv Ayin Hu Yaveirach, right? After the Eibishter gave the Baal Shem Tov. The Even Teiv Shebekeser HaMelech, right? The Pnimius HaKeser, the precious stone, which is the base of the king's crown. And the Baal Shem Tov gave it to all of us, for all generations. And the Tzadikim, the Rabbeim, the Gedei Yisrael, the Gedei Achsidis, packaged it. If you remember the classes I've given you, we spent a lot of time in Jerusalem time, the packaging. Every tzaddik, every rebbe, every gadol b'Yisrael who was makabel for the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritch Maggid packaged Chassidus in a different packaging. And the Alter Rebbe packaged Chassidus in a package of Chochma Bina Vadas. Why? Because this is what the Mezritch Maggid told him. The Mezritch Maggid told him that this is his shlichus. His shlichus is to create a Chassidus which will be a pnimius, the Chassidus. And the meaning of the word pnimius is, where the chassid Chassidus is his own. He goes to a Rebbe to get Chassidus. He goes to a Rebbe to get Hayran, Hadracha, and Avoida, how to internalize Chassidus. But the work and the achievement is personal. He has to make himself into a chassid. This is the Chassidus Chiddush, Chassidus Chabad, where the Chassidus is not based only on the direct contact in the chassid and the Rebbe, the tzaddik, the Guterid, but that the Chassidus becomes pnimius. So the Alter Rebbe spent his life, the primary mission of the Alter Rebbe in this world was to create Chassidus Chabad, which he did. And Chassidus Chabad, it's Chassidus, it's Oid, it's Neshama, but you reach this Neshama through the mind. Like it says, Nayem Yem, the expression, there's nothing more lifeless than the human mind. And the Alter Rebbe made it a vehicle for godliness. The Lashon is, nobody is a greater Mechaya Mason than the Alter Rebbe. They're talking Kalterezach. There's nothing colder and more lifeless than the human mind. And the Alter Rebbe made a kli for a lakus. And that's a Taisha Rucho Ktsara. So the Alter Rebbe is providing a path to Chassidus, which is long. Because you have to work. You can't just go to a tzaddik, to a Rebbe, and get charged up. It's long, there's a lot of work to do. But Ktsara, the work that one does and achieves, has a certain measure of permanence, a certain measure of hatzlocha, a certain measure of pnimius. You become a new person. As opposed to another Chassidus, and the Chassidus is based on direct contact with the Rebbe. So every day you need new contact. And if you've been away from the Rebbe for a couple of days, you immediately feel the waning and the weakening of the attachedness, and you have to renew it, you have to recharge it. It's not just upfrish. Just to push it to tight, b'derech haruchu ktsara, that the whole of Chassidus Chabad is a long, short way. It's an approach to Avodas Hashem, which is thorough, which is deep, which involves your humanity very much, but it's a job, it's a work, it's a lifetime. That's the first taich of the words haruchu ktsara. But there's a second taich of haruchu ktsara. And the second taich of haruchu ktsara is that in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe gives himself two different methods. The first 17 chapters, Perek Aleph till Yud Zayin, is the long path. Because this is where the Alter Rebbe discusses the idea of Meyach, Shalit, Ala, Leiv, the mind teaching and inspiring and controlling the heart, which is, of course, the Inyan for Chabad. And the second path is chapter 18 until 25, Perek Yud Ches till Chaf Hei, which is the Derech Ktsara, which is the short path. In other words, it's not that Haruchu Ktsara is one path that's both involved and successful and comprehensive. It's two different paths. There's a derech harucha, which is the first 70%. This is really deep for Chabad. And the derech tzara, which is almost like a makavdika thing. It's almost like a Siddur Saklolis type thing. It's an emunah type thing, which is chapters 18 until 25. Beginning with chapter 26 is a whole nother Tanya. But the inyan of being a beinin, Bepashtus is explained twice in the first 25 prakim. One is long, and long not just because it takes up a lot of pages, but because the work is involved. It's derech harucha, Chabad. And the other one is short, it's less prakim, and it's more of a munah and a mitzvah. It's nefesh type idea, mitzvah, we'll get to it eventually. So what did I not teach you today? The paper that I gave you. The paper is going to explain the pasuk. You go over the mitzvah. Say, so we'll do this mitzvah Hashem next time in mitzvah Hashem.